My next guest is Dr. Matthew Downing. He is an experienced educator currently working as a K 12 supervisor of online learning in a large public school district. Dr. Downing is passionate about fostering innovative educational opportunities for teachers and students. He does that through thoughtful hands on learning experiences. On top of that, Dr. Downing is considering ways to move education forward. Check him out at divingdeepedu.libsyn.com. Well, welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Yeah, Dana, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk about these things. And thanks for all the work you're doing with this podcast and all the other stuff you're doing.
Thanks for getting in touch. And I'm excited also to record on your podcast this week. And we'll talk about your podcast as well. But we'll start off with asking, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Oh, man. In the trenches. Well, that's a complex question because in some ways I'm still in the trenches, right? And in some areas I haven't climbed out of the trenches. And then there's so many different areas in your life, right? So we have our life, our school, then our life is made up of so many different parts as well. But I won't get too deep into life areas where I climbed out of the trenches or maybe still haven't climbed out of the trenches. So back when I think about school and think about education and think about kids and think about teaching, there are so many times where you're in the trenches and you got to get out. So sometimes those trenches could be shallow, so it's easy to get back out, and sometimes those trenches are more difficult to get out of, and you need a lot of help. So when I think about that, just off the top of my head, it brings me back to a moment maybe 4 years into teaching, and I'm in an urban school, and whatever. There's difficulties and all of those sorts of things. But I loved that school. I loved being there. I liked teaching, interacting with the students. And this one particular day, what was a rougher day, when it's a rough day, you feel stress around you, and that can take a toll in many ways. And the building as a whole was a little bit chaotic. So the class dismissed, and I, it's a middle school. So I was walking the halls, just trying to move kids along. You got to get to class. We're in school. You should be learning. And the bell rang, and these kids are really, really late, and they were congregating. And I didn't know any of these students, but I'm a teacher. I'm trying to make a difference. So I go up to the kids, and I'm not really confrontational. I'm not a big football guy, and I don't yell at people. That's not the way I interact. So I'm going up, hey guys, we got to get to class. And one of the kids comes out of the group and steps to me like we're about to fight. And I'm like, whoa, what is going on here? You know what I mean? And, I'm a young teacher, so I stepped to him too. And I'm like, what is going on? And my, fight or flight responses are ringing. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like the feelings that I have here, because I love being here, but I'm feeling this high stress and high anxiety and all of these different features going on within a school building where we're supposed to be learning and interacting with the students in a positive way. Thankfully, another teacher was there, saw that this wasn't a good situation, helped intervene and disperse the kids. But I had to go teach in 30 seconds. So I'm walking down in my classroom, and I could not compose myself. So I called to the office, and I never called to the office. I called to the office, and I'm like, hey, I just need somebody down here real quick. And they're like, what? And so the principal came down because, I don't ever call to the office. So something happened, and he could see in my eyes that I wasn't okay. And I wasn't. So he calls security. Security comes. He's like, hey, he has security. So he was like, take over the class. Just watch them. And then he took me and he just put his arm around my shoulder, and we just walked around the neighborhood for like 30 minutes.
Wow.
Say much. I didn't say much, but I knew he was there for me, and I knew he had my back. And then after some time, I de-escalated. I was calm. He checked in on me later, and we talked through the situation and thought about ways I could have done things differently. And then he took care of the student. But the reason I bring that up is because That's a powerful story, and it brings to me because it brought to the forefront the importance of relationships. So
Mm-hmm.
I knew that principal in a deeper way, and he knew me, and I knew he had my back, and I was okay. And all it took was his arm around my shoulder and going for a walk in the midst of a very chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
stressful, high intense situation. And through that, you know, I was able to get out of the trench, and I was able to interact with that student again, and that student and I and were okay, and we moved on, and that student had a consequence. I don't know if it was anything big because I didn't push for anything big, because it was just it took me off guard. And then another situation that I think about is another principal I had a couple years earlier in my first year teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Another crazy building, and there's a lot of craziness going on, and I didn't know if I was going to make it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that principal knew I was a good teacher, and had started having me over for dinner, started having me over for meals, and I knew that principal had my back, and that helped, right, get me out of the trench and keep me moving because of that relationship. Right, that principal could have said all they wanted, done so many observations, which they actually never did any observations, any of those principals, which I don't know if that's good, but there was that relationship
Yeah.
that helped get me out of the trench and keep me moving. And those are two that I think about, that I'm thinking about now, and I think about sometimes when I go back to education and sort of the pivotal moments in my life, and
Mm-hmm.
and what was important in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's I think it's a rare thing for newer teachers these days to actually have a principal that will
Mm,
take the time
yeah.
to come down. They hear you're calling the office for help, and step outside and help de-escalate you.
Mm-hmm.
And then that principal that would have you over for dinner when you were a new teacher and maybe new to
Yeah.
the area, and it was great that you had the opportunity to have that support. I think more principals are learning now that they need that staff
Mm-hmm.
um, connectedness, right? And I think they are trying, at least among the staff, to build that community.
Yeah.
But I do see leaders, at least in my experience, that kind of are standoffish.
Yeah.
And I really think it goes a long way, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
when they take the time to get to know you, to see, you're not in a good place, and then help you move on, recognize what the posturing of the student did to you, and then, really recognize that you needed that time to de escalate. You weren't able to teach. I mean, I'm sure I've had situations with students that had me in a bad place throughout the
Yeah.
years I taught. And um, I probably wouldn't have even thought of calling the office, because you don't always get, somebody to pick up, or,
Yeah.
but I'm glad that you took the time, and that you were able to get through that. And yeah, it didn't cause you to leave education.
No, 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 no. And another thing I want to point out, like hopping off what you said,
Mhm.
these these principles were very relational, but they were also good leaders. So
Yeah.
they weren't just buddy buddy, like, oh, let me just, like, you want to go get a drink, like hang out.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like that. They casted a vision. And when they would talk, people would listen. And when they had a
Mhm.
vision, people would follow. But with me, and I don't know if everyone felt like that with those leaders, but with me, I also felt this relationship that's,
Mhm.
yeah, my arms around you. I'm here as a support when you need me, and we're going to do this together. And here's the vision. Now, so I've also seen some principals and they're buddy buddy with everyone, and all the teachers think that's cool, like at the beginning, but then they all complain like 6 months later, oh, this principal's not giving us a vision, or they're not leading, or they're not taking care of business. So like teachers, I think, want both, right? They want
Mhm.
that principal that's strong and giving a vision and casting something bigger than themselves, but also willing to come alongside, put their arm around somebody and like, we're in this together. We're going to keep moving. I'm not better than you. We're in this together. So I think that's important too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The servant leader, but
Mm-hmm.
also the visionary leader as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about your current role. So, you're a technology integration specialist, but you're also the interim supervisor of online learning for your district.
Yep.
So, talk to me about kind of what that
Yeah.
entails and kind of how the online learning component is in your district.
Yeah. So I'm in a urban school district. It's about, just to give people an idea of the landscape, it's about 1,000 teachers,
Mhm.
15,000 students. So within my role, I'm helping sort of cast the vision or create the vision and implement it within online learning. So we have 3 modes within our school district, and this is for K through 12. The student can do an asynchronous online learning. So they could, they have the same curriculum, but they're interacting with it on their daily basis, right? They don't have to live stream. They can also live stream synchronous. So they're following the same exact curriculum as a student that's in class, but they're beaming in through video cameras and interacting with the teacher that way. And then you have the live. So the students can go in and out of all 3 of those in sort of a fluid way. We ask that they and really try to push that they make the switch at quarters or semesters, because it's a lot on the teacher. So let's talk about the teacher. The teacher might have 3 different modes of instruction in their class, one teacher. So that one teacher might be teaching kids in person. They might have kids beaming in through video cameras that have been installed in the classrooms. Now, these are video cameras that they can't get live to the public. It's like through Zoom or whatever, but it has to be plugged in. So they're not like going on all the time. And then that teacher might have students that are asynchronous. Now, the asynchronous courses have been created by the district. We're not outsourcing stuff through Pearson. So we've created these, tailored them to our actual curriculum, and they've been made by the teachers. And I've helped with that process as well. So that's not as tricky, but the teacher does have to interact with those students, obviously. But that curriculum has been created. We're not using any third-party curriculum. So it's a lot for the teacher. So the teachers that are doing it well are putting in a lot of thought, they're putting in a lot of work, and they are excelling, and they're really helping the students. Teachers that are struggling, I can feel for them. One thing I think a lot about in my own life and in other people's work is the impact of context switching. Shifting from one context to another. And you could probably relate to this with all of the different things you have going on. When we shift from one to another, we lose time and we lose focus and we lose energy. And we oftentimes think we can switch more than what we can, and it has a toll on our minds. And I feel for the teachers that have to switch between these 3 contexts on a daily basis. So what am I really interested in? I'm interested in curating an environment that is learner friendly and impacts them in a transformative way. And so I'm hoping we're getting there.
So your job is more focused on the teachers, that they're supported rather than kind of the curriculum development piece, or?
No, I do both. So I help with the curriculum development, working with the other supervisors. I work with the teachers, and then I also work with the families and the students. So it's not uncommon for a family to reach out, and then I'll walk them through it. Sometimes they're just confused about the process. Sometimes I talk to one family. They the teacher was like, they're not showing up. I'm like, oh, what's up with that? So let me reach out. I reach out, nobody reaches out. I reach out to emergency contact. It's the uncle. The uncle was the nicest guy. I'm like, I just want to support, I'm trying to help out. want to make sure the student is getting their education. The uncle's like, well, he's been in Africa for a month. I'm like, okay, well, so that's why he hasn't logged in. But it's really sad though, because his mom died. So I was able to support and work as a mediator between that situation. So the student wasn't truant. I was able to help the family through a difficult time and walk them through that. And so I do that too, not that extreme, but I always want to help the families, you know, walk across that bridge, because sometimes they get stuck.
Yeah, and then I've seen that as well when I've worked with attendants, that people signed up for online learning, and you have to make sure that they're actually active. So,
it's tough.
so yeah, let's shift and talk about your podcast, Diving Deeper EDU. You previously had a podcast, Rethinking EDU, but that was a project you worked on during your doctorate. But let's talk about kind of what Diving Deeper EDU talks about, kind of the format of the podcast, what the next series will be, or other series that you might have planned this spring. So
Rethinking EDU was started with 3 friends at Northeastern University: Mike Dunn, Janine Dunn, not related, Julie Cook, and it was just 3 good friends, and we got thinking about innovative you know, educational ideas right when the pandemic hit. And so Mike is sort of the visionary leader, and he got us together, and we just started having conversation with you know, different people within education. And so that went really well. We got up to 50 episodes, our last episode, and that podcast is still live. And then Diving Deep EDU, I sort of launched that in the midst of Rethinking EDU to have a little bit more of a focus. It's just me talking to people. I started talking about, because my background's in technology integration, so I started talking about leaders within technology integration, people from Google and other people like that. And we had really good conversations, and you could go back to the first batch and look. And then I started making a switch to, I wanted to talk to people that have been successful in their life, and I wanted to really like dive into what made them successful and what's their approach on education. So these wouldn't be educational leaders. So for example, I had 3 of the founding members of Hamilton, the musical.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and that was really interesting. Maybe I had 4. And that was really interesting because I wanted to hear like who they were, you know, and I wanted to hear how they viewed education, because oftentimes, and it's, you know, I've had this view, the arts is sort of this outlier within education, and I think we need to bring them to the center and get a greater view. So those were really, really good conversations. And then my kids are obsessed with Hamilton, so I had them on as the final episode within them, and they talked to all of the people and asked them like cute questions. And then I talked to Olympians, you know, people that have won medals, and I wanted to hear their story. You know, these are like crazy competitive people that have reached the top of a sport, you know. And I had one of the people from the Hall of Fame, you know, on volleyball, this guy from I think he's from Serbia. Yeah, he's from Serbia. So he was on, and I had him, I had some swimmers, I had some skaters and different people that have won medals. And I wanted to hear from them, what is their philosophy? You know, what do they think? You know, these are crazy competitive people, and they brought a new lens. I've had authors, especially children's book authors. You know, one of my kids' favorites is Skippy John Jones. So we had that author on, and that was such a sweet episode. And from that, we got to meet with her and hang out with her, and that was a really, really special time for me and for my kids. She's such a sweet lady. And so those are the sorts of conversations I've had, and I really enjoyed those. Different authors, New York Times journalists, and things like that. And they've helped us think about education a little bit differently. And then I'm shifting now because I see there's an issue, and everyone can see this, you know, with teacher hiring and teacher exodus. And maybe we could talk about this more later. I don't know if we'll have time, but So that's where I'm going
Yeah.
in the next, and really the foreseeable future. So I'm not going to do a short. I've done a mini lesson on blended learning, a mini series on blended learning, but I'm not gonna. This isn't going to be a mini series. This is going to be the new shift. So maybe
Okay.
even for the next 50 episodes, I'm going to be exploring teacher retention with people like yourself and researchers and other teachers in the field and teachers that have left the field. And I want to know, like, what are the reasons? What are the causes? What are the sticking points? What are
Mhm.
the issues around this huge issue that's going to impact education for the foreseeable future?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's great to have that focus. Like you said, you've talked to people that are not necessarily working in education, like Olympians and
Mm-hmm.
children's book authors and things, but also to pinpoint reasons. And I mean, there's reasons galore, but it's kind of also depending on where people are and
Mm-hmm.
in their career. And like you mentioned with your trench story, it's also a lot of the time lack of support,
Yeah.
the lead teachers to leave, right? And
Yeah.
and we'll talk about that some on your podcast when I'm a
Yeah.
guest, kind of how I in my book talk about you
Mm-hmm.
can be in trenches, right? And then finding your way out or getting the supports.
Yeah.
But definitely that's not a new topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teacher retention, and it just seems to be getting worse. I have experienced this year there are a little fewer people leaving,
Okay.
right? At the school I'm at there. As far as I know, we have not had anybody leave first semester. There might be somebody, that leaves at semester shift.
Yeah.
But last year, people were dropping like flies, you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so maybe we're on the lookup. We'll see. But
I hope.
we've had a great conversation about some of your experiences as a teacher and your current role as well and your podcast. Out of everything we've talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Yeah, probably to go back to the beginning and
Yeah.
thinking about relationships, how key they are. As us within education, we want
Yeah.
teachers, we want to have relationships with students. And for our leaders that are listening, that are tuning in, we got to get back to the core. So we know within the classroom that a relationship with a student transforms the classroom, right? Without a doubt,
Hmm.
we can all say that. But with leaders and teachers that are listening, let's keep that at the forefront. And leaders, we need to make sure we're building relationships with the students and the teachers within the classroom. And I would also want people to leave with, and we didn't really talk about this, but the idea of humility.
Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of change, bringing about change. I want to
Hmm.
change and I want to iterate and I want to figure things out. But I want to do that with a posture of humility that
Hmm.
I want to bring about change and I have ideas that galore, right? I got ideas. I could have sticky notes up on my wall, but I'm not convinced that those ideas are the best.
Yeah.
I want to bring an idea on the table and you could rip it to shreds, but I'm bringing it with a posture of humility, and you should also rip that to shreds with a posture of humility. And
Hmm.
as we're doing that, we're going to bring about real change and lasting change as a result of our interaction, our collaboration, and coming to the table with ideas and with humility that we don't know the best. I've read so many books, like I don't even want to count the number of books I've read. Taken so many classes and all this and all that, so many degrees and blah, blah, blah. But I still am not convinced that I know the best way
Hmm.
forward for a certain context, for a certain situation. I am an expert in many, many areas, but it doesn't mean that I know the best way forward for a certain situation. And I want to approach that with humility. And I think, it's a challenge for everyone to do that as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I really like how you put that. Like you might have these degrees, you might have these courses, but you're still learning.
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same way in terms of change and ideas.
Yeah.
But it's also approaching how you can serve that community in the best way that is the right way for them.
Yeah.
So sounds like that's what you're doing in your current role. So where can people connect with you and find you online?
Yeah. So Diving Deep EDU. Yeah, I sort of got rid of my my custom domain. I got to get that back. But if you just search Diving Deep EDU on
Hmm.
podcast or even on Google, and the main social media that I use is LinkedIn, so you can
Hmm.
connect with me there and find some links. There's links and everything on my LinkedIn page. I keep that up pretty well
Okay.
with links and resources and reach out and contact me on there.
Great, great. Well, it was great having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast today, and look forward to chatting with you as well
Yeah.
for your podcast. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.